The truth about plastic recycling. Is it really worth it? Welcome to English with Billy, the podcast where we explore important issues, traditions, and ideas to help you improve your English and connect with the world. I'm your host, Billy, and today we're diving into a topic that affects us all, recycling, specifically plastic recycling. For years, we've been told that recycling plastic is the solution to reducing waste and protecting the planet. We rinse our bottles, separate our trash, and drop plastics into the blue bin, feeling good about doing our part for the environment. But what if I told you that most plastic doesn't actually get recycled? It never has. So, is recycling really worth it? And if not, what can we do instead? In today's episode, we'll uncover why plastic recycling doesn't work, the myths surrounding recycling, and whether it's still worth the effort. I'll share some personal stories and real-world examples along the way, so stick around, and as always, we'll pick up some useful vocabulary to help you discuss this important topic in English. My first aha moment about recycling. Before we get into the facts, let me share a personal story with you. I used to be like most people. I believed that if I tossed my plastic bottle into the recycling bin, it would magically transform into a new bottle somewhere down the line. I lived in this bubble until a few years ago when I took a tour of a local recycling center. The workers were kind enough to show us the sorting process. I remember standing in front of a giant conveyor belt as plastic bottles, containers, and cans zipped by. What I noticed, though, was the mountain of plastics they pulled off the line, items they couldn't recycle. Some of it was contaminated food packaging. Some were the wrong types of plastic, like thin films or lids. One worker said, "About 70% of what comes in here will never be recycled. It'll go straight to the landfill." That statistic blew my mind. It turns out this problem is not unique to my city. Only about 9% of all plastic ever produced has been successfully recycled worldwide. The rest ends up in landfills, oceans, or is incinerated. So how did we get here? Why does plastic recycling fail so often? Let's break it down. First, here's a term to learn: contaminated. If something is contaminated, it's made dirty or impure, which can make it unusable. In recycling, food or grease can contaminate plastic, making it impossible to recycle. Okay, so now that you know the reality of recycling, let's look at the reasons why plastic recycling doesn't work as well as we think. 1. Not all plastic is created equal. Unlike glass or metal, which can be recycled repeatedly, plastics are far more complex. There are 7 major types of plastic labeled with numbers 1 through 7 inside the recycling triangle. Some plastics, like the ones in water bottles, PET number 1, are easier to recycle. Others, like plastic bags or styrofoam, are nearly impossible to process economically. I once saw a woman at the grocery store put everything in one bin: milk jugs, plastic bags, greasy pizza boxes, and coffee cups. She turned to me and said, "They'll sort it out." Unfortunately, no. Most recycling facilities don't have the technology to separate everything properly, and contaminated batches often end up in the trash. 2. Low economic value. Producing new plastic is much cheaper than recycling old plastic. Companies prefer fresh material because recycled plastic is lower quality and more expensive to process. 3. Global changes. For years, countries like the US sent millions of tons of plastic waste to China for recycling. But in 2018, China stopped accepting most imported waste through its national sword policy. Suddenly, there was nowhere to send all that plastic, so it began piling up in landfills. The bottom line? Even if you separate your trash perfectly, the system itself is flawed. As much as we want to believe in recycling, it can't solve the plastic problem alone. Oh, here's another word to learn: flawed. If something is flawed, it has weaknesses or errors that make it less effective. Plastic recycling is flawed because the system can't handle all types of plastic. Moving on now to the recycling myth and how it got started. This is something I didn't know until recently. The recycling movement was heavily promoted by the plastic industry. Starting in the 1970s and 80s, companies launched campaigns about recycling, encouraging people to take responsibility for plastic waste. At the same time, plastic production skyrocketed. Why would companies promote recycling? Well, it shifted attention away from them, the ones producing the plastic, and made consumers feel responsible for solving the problem. A friend once told me, "If I recycle, it's fine to use plastic." That's the myth. The idea that recycling can undo the harm of producing so much plastic in the first place. In reality, recycling has been like putting a tiny bandage on a giant wound. While recycling works for materials like glass, paper, and aluminum, it has failed for plastic. At this point, you might be asking, if recycling doesn't work for plastic, is it worth doing at all? The answer is yes, but with balance. Recycling other materials, like glass, paper, and aluminum, makes a huge difference. For example, aluminum cans can be recycled endlessly and save 95% of the energy needed to make new ones. Glass bottles can be melted down and reused without losing quality. Paper recycling helps save trees and water. When it comes to plastic, though, reducing and reusing is much more effective than recycling. So what can we do instead? Let me tell you a personal story. A few months ago, I visited a farmer's market with a group of friends. Everyone brought reusable bags, mason jars, and containers to avoid using plastic. One of my friends said something that stuck with me. It's not about being perfect. It's about doing better every day. And that's the mindset we need. Here are a few practical things we can do. 1. Reduce plastic use. Bring reusable bottles, bags, and utensils wherever you go. Small habits add up. 2. Support businesses that use less plastic. Look for products with sustainable packaging. Some companies are switching to biodegradable or refillable options. 3. Educate others. Talk to your friends, family, and coworkers about the reality of recycling. Awareness is the first step toward change. 4. Pressure for change. Support policies and businesses that prioritize reducing plastic production, not just managing the waste it creates. These changes might feel small, but remember, the power to reduce waste lies in the choices we make every day. So, is recycling really worth it? For materials like aluminum, glass, and paper, absolutely. But when it comes to plastic, the system is deeply flawed. Recycling alone cannot fix the plastic crisis. The real solution lies in reducing how much plastic we use and rethinking our relationship with waste. Thank you for joining me on English with Billy. I hope this episode gave you a deeper understanding of recycling, the challenges with plastic, and what we can do to make a real impact. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with others. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, small steps lead to big changes.